Let me now begin with the second part of my presentation. This research article is about the high prevalence of suicide among the indigenous Maori youth. And please note that suicide is mentioned in Heine's Cultural Psychology textbook under the Universal Syndrome. The book states that suicidal ideation is one of the universal syndromes, and under this category, one should consider the biological foundation of mental illness. He also added that suicide may have various manifestations due to cultural influences and the motivations behind the suicidal thoughts. The complete title of the article that I have chosen is The Associations Between Cultural Identity and Mental Health Outcomes for Indigenous Maori Youth in New Zealand. And the authors are Ashley Williams, Terry Ann Clark, and Sonia Luika. In this article, the researchers are interested to know the cause of the poor mental health results of Indigenous Maori youth of New Zealand compared to the young people of New Zealand with European heritage. So their data shows that Maori youth have higher prevalence rate of suicide attempts, and they have lower score on general well-being. Also, they found out that they have higher death rates due to suicide, which is 2 times higher. And also, they found out that Maori youth have limited access to healthcare, and they experience mental health stigma and ethnic discrimination frequently. And so, the health workers, despite the limited information available, are seeking ways on how this problem, how to solve the problem these Maori youth are experiencing. And so the authors started with a literature review to understand the cause of poor level of mental health and high suicide rates among the Maori youth. And the following are the varied claims that they found out from different authors. The first one is they found out that colonization had a negative impact to contemporary Maori youth because it led to the breakdown of traditional cultural structures. It resulted to hopelessness and loss of meaning. And they also said that suicide can be prevented when kinship-based cultural identity is intact and relationships are positive and functional. Family and community relationship, as well as Maori identity and culture, are considered protective for mental health concerns, and it can also become protective against suicide. High levels of collectivism and cultural knowledge and language, they found out, can improve mental well-being. However, there's a limited evidence that proves Maori cultural identity as protective. There are Maori youth who are immersed. Also, they found out that there are Maori youth who are immersed in Maori culture but still commit suicide due to increased exposure to childhood physical abuse and interparental violence. So the objective of the study is to explore the relationships between Maori cultural identity, ethnic discrimination, and mental health outcomes for the young people of Maori in New Zealand. And hypothesis is that a strong Maori cultural identity can improve mental health well-being for the Maoris and prevent suicide to actually happen. As the part of their methodology, the selection of participants is really very important. The researchers identified the survey project as Youth 12. It was conducted nationally in New Zealand, and they targeted students, the secondary school students, aging 12 to 19 years old. And using a 2-stage cluster sample design survey, they invited 30% of the secondary schools to participate. And from this number, 20% of students were randomly selected. The response rate from the school is at 72.8%, while the student response rate was 68%. The Youth 12 questionnaire are said to be written in both English and the Maori language. They said they administered this via a multimedia computer administered survey instrument on internet tablets. But prior to the conduct of the survey, they secured the approval of the University of Auckland Human Participants Ethics Committee. And the survey contains 9 domains that address the determinants of well-being for the youth. Variables relevant to their research, such as ethnic-specific questions, mental health, family well-being, social connections, are also included. On the second part of their methodology, it's about the development of the Maori Cultural Identity Scale, or the MCIS. In the development of this scale, the researchers explored the theories in their literature review and also used factor analysis. They also selected themes for the surveys and used it as guide for the MCIS development. So they included the personality ethnic identity, or the who I am question, and the precious Maori cultural resources. They also use the theme social determinants of well-being as covariates and possible confounders in their analysis through the inclusion of deprivation and discrimination items. In their analysis, the researchers say that they use the logistic regression model to explore the association between MCIS and the 3 mental health outcomes. This is to predict the independent variables. They state that they adjusted the model according to age, gender, neighborhood deprivation, and discrimination, and they explored for effect modification by age and gender, and by including interaction terms in the model. The results are presented as weighted percentage odds ratios with 95% confidence level intervals, I mean. The dependent variables are the quality of life, or the well-being, and depression, and suicidal ideation. The quality of life was measured using the WHO 5 well-being index, and the depression is measured through the Reynolds Adolescent Depression Scale short form. Suicidal ideation is measured based on just one question, which is if they have tried to kill themselves in the last 12 months. The independent variables are the Maori cultural identity, age, gender, deprivation, and ethnic discrimination. In the process of the survey, the results showed that they had 8,500 participants from 91 schools across New Zealand, and in that 91 school, I think 87 school have Maori students. And then out of the 1,701 Maori youth that they found, which composed 20.1% of the students that they surveyed, there were 27 missing data. And so the number of participants that they considered were brought down to 1,674. And among these participants, 52%, 52.8, or almost 53% are female, and almost 71% are Maori young people with 15 to or younger ages. They also found out from the survey that 25% of Maori students live in areas with medium and high level of deprivation. And 25% among students experience discrimination in school, with the police, and in their access to health care. And 75.1 students report well-being, while 13.8 report depressive symptoms, and 6.5% among the participants reported suicide attempt. And the table shows the descriptive participant characteristic by level of cultural identity. The result of the survey shows that the findings support the claim that the strong sense of cultural identity is protective for mental health outcomes. It affirms the indigenous peoples' claim that cultural identity and pride are connected to well-being. Suicide attempts, poor well-being, high depression are due to strong effect of discrimination. And the socioeconomic deprivation has low influence for suicide attempts. The researchers say that this is an important finding and it differs from previous literatures. But the researchers also found out that there's no evidence for effect modifications of the associations between cultural identity and mental health outcomes by age or gender. Maori youth also they found out that Maori youth with better economic condition who lives outside the poor area. They say that Maori people lives in specific areas because of their poverty conditions. So most of those who have better economic condition and they live outside the poor area, they experience more discrimination. However, those deprived Maori youth living in high density have better well-being due to less exposure to discrimination and have better supports or access to cultural resources. Also, the researchers said that socially classified white people are associated with healthy advantage and thus harmfully reinforcing the structural and interpersonal racism in healthcare. And also, they note that this study failed to infer causality and thus cannot be generalized to all Maori youth. In conclusion, the researchers said that discrimination has serious negative impact on the Maori youth's mental health. And they said that cultural identity can enhance well-being and reduce depressive symptoms. And that program policies and practice that promote strong cultural identities and eliminate discrimination, ethnic discrimination, are essential in promoting the well-being of the Maori young people. The researchers recommend the continued reclaiming of traditional Maori traditions and practices by Maori youth to help them to heal and have meaningful life. At the same time, there must be a commitment to disrupt the structure, or shall we say classifications, that perpetuate discrimination in research, policies, and programs. The researchers recommends that programs and policies for health and suicide prevention for Maori youth should ensure inclusion of culturally relevant components. In summary, um, looking back on the tradition on the first part of the presentation, and I would like to point out the traditions that the Maori people have. Well, it seems haka, hongi, hangi are they are just few of the traditions, but these three traditions reflect how Maoris value the support of community living. I say that because it is interesting to see that haka is always more meaningful when performed with a group. With a group, sorry, and hangi is also social occasion for the community more than just cooking of food in a different way. And the hongi greeting means a person become a part of a group and is no longer a stranger. And they display a collectivist culture. The research showed the positive impact of strong cultural identity in countering the negative impacts of discrimination to the mental health well-being of young people. The recommendation to include the development of stronger Maori identity in programs and policies is a positive step in moving forward. However, we must not discount that suicidal ideation is also a universal syndrome and might have biological causes that needs to be addressed as well and given importance. A person contemplating suicide is like person hanging on the end of the cliff, and he needs all the help he can get to hang on and access to social support that he can relate with with his cultural identity will help in coping and improving his thinking process. At the same time, this research was able to show the associations of ethnic discrimination and depression to the mental health of the Maori young people, and thus the recommendation to include the strengthening of cultural identity and the review of discriminatory policies and structures should be considered. For the third part of the presentation, which is the discussion, I just want to leave some questions. So, do you agree with some observer who says that Maori's cultural programming and strengthening of cultural identity is ideology driven? Why or why not? Do you think the researchers are correct to call for the disruption of the structures that perpetuate discrimination in research, policies, and programs? And is suicide is a mental health problem included in the universal syndrome, saying it has biological foundation. Do you agree with the suggestion to strengthen cultural identification as a solution to prevent it? Why or why not? Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I just want to show on this part the the sources that I referred to. And thank you very much for listening. And I hope everyone is safe and taking a lot of precaution to avoid the COVID virus ongoing right now. Well, thank you.